All, this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from DrBeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So the discussion today is a follow-up. One of the cool beans commented, I believe it may be Snoopy, who commented that a list of foods that may cause leaky gut or inflamed intestinal epithelial barrier may be a useful list. Now, to give a disclaimer, that the reaction of ourselves and our gut to the food is not common in everyone. We know that some people are gluten sensitive, others have issues with uh, monosaccharides and disaccharides or simple sugars. Some have issues with fibers. So the way we react to food depends upon our body, our epithelial cell state and their age, our food categories that we are taking, the immune system cells that are present in the gut and their reactivity, our hygiene, the food's hygiene, and then the rhythm of the food, how often we eat food, the volume of the food, how much do we eat food, the content of the food, the contents of the food, what kind of things do we eat, our traveling status. We may eat something here where we live versus we eat the same thing in a different location, and we might react to it differently because of the microbiota differences and various kind of contents or pathogens that are different in other locations. So that means this list is not pertinent to every single person. However, I try to package together as much of the material together in this list, the one that I'm going to present. The idea of this is to just give you some samples and some mechanisms to have you start thinking and researching for your own needs. And of course, whenever you are going to make any changes to your food or your habits, do talk with your doctor as well, because there can be reactions when you change your food structure. So with this, let's start. So the foods that may cause leaky gut. First category, refined sugars and processed foods. I think these are the top of the list. In that list, so look at the list first. It will be not useful for me to read out the whole list. Number one. Number two, this is the list which is not exhaustive, but has some main players in each category. And it is also possible that as part of my research, I may have made a mistake as well. So please, if you see a mistake, point that out. It was a lot of work to look at all the food lists. Third important thing with these lists are that there are parts of the food lists that you would see here where the food may be produced originally organically. And then as it is produced on an industrial scale, then it is now produced with more industrial processes, which in turn can impart issues with the same food. For example, let's say teriyaki sauce, that is part of the sushi Japanese food. Teriyaki sauce can actually be produced organically without much harm other than the soy piece in it. And then when it is produced at a larger scale, there may be preservatives, there may be sugars, there may be other additives to it. And all of a sudden, the name is still the teriyaki sauce, but it may become harmful. So just be aware that this is not an exhaustive list. This may have mistakes in it as well, but this would get you started with the kind of foods that drop in various categories. So here, refined sugars, sugar-heavy beverages, processed snacks, ultra-processed foods. As one of my doctor colleague friends say, those things that come in boxes and those foods that do not look like foods may be an issue. Sweetened dairy products, condiment sauces. So now the question is, I'm more interested than the list, which you can take a snapshot of these. I'm more interested in presenting to you some mechanisms to understand why these categories may be causing inflammation in some people. So the ultra-processed foods and sugars, how can they cause an issue? So the first one and the big one is the advanced glycation end products. On my channel, I have done multiple videos about how glycation end products are formed. I would just give a couple of pointers over here that are important. Number one, advanced glycation end products is where glucose gets attached to a protein or a lipid at higher temperature. Now, glycation can occur at our normal body temperatures as well. For example, hemoglobin A1C is glycated hemoglobin. That is hemoglobin that has gotten glucose attached to it. And that happens on our body temperature. However, whenever higher amounts of heat is involved, that would cause de-shaping of the molecules, and more age products, or these products where glucose is attached, unnaturally attached to proteins and lipids, more amounts will be produced. So whenever you are looking at any food where you suspect that the preparation of the food used high temperature, and then any food that where you suspect that the preparation may have used frying, that can be a food which will become harmful. Now, the question that is important to answer in the age products or glycation products is that when we eat some food that has glycation products in it or age products in it, for example, let's say French fries or other fried foods or highly processed on high heat foods, would these products, these age products, not break down into our stomach and GIT into smaller pieces and then go and get absorbed? So the problem is that the age products are so modified and so tangled up messes that it is not necessary that our normal innocent enzymes can actually easily break them down. Because of that, age products can cause two problems. Number one, they can become absorbed into our circulation, and from there they can enter our body and cause inflammation in various tissues, for example, joint pains, muscle pains, even brain issues or dementia-like issues. The second problem that the age products do, advanced glycation end products do, is that they directly hurt the intestinal epithelium. So when they hurt the intestinal epithelium, if you look at my previous video, right, the video right before this one, you would see that the epithelial cells, the gut lining cells, will separate from each other as a result of the attack of inflammation and harmful substances. And when the cells separate from each other, that would cause the gut content to start seeping into the gut wall. And not only that, the blood content starts seeping out into the gut. And so that becomes a problem. So going back to this. So if you see here, with the age, I have these glucoses, and this is a happy cell with some cilia on top of it, and it is functioning fine, and it is kind of doing wipers and having a happy dance. Imagine this is respiratory epithelium. Then the glucoses start attaching to these little cilia, and now the cilia are not working correctly because they are now bared down by unnatural attachment of glucose to them. This can happen to the epithelial cells of our gut as well. Then these refined sugars and the ultra processed foods, they can feed the harmful bacteria. So in our gut, we have three kinds of bacteria. We have good bacteria, then we have neutral bacteria, and then we have harmful bacteria. The normal microbiota composition, healthy composition, is where the good bacteria are more and the harmful bacteria are suppressed. However, dysbiosis can occur. Dysbiosis is where the good bacteria become lesser in amount and the bad bacteria become more. So what happens is that these products, actually, of course, they feed the bacteria as well. These bacteria that live in us, they get food from somewhere. Where do they get food from? They get the food that we eat, or the remnants of or digested parts of it that reach the colon and the rectum. So when you feed them age-like products, when you feed them additives, preservatives, food colors, they can become dysbiotic. The harmful bacteria can start growing more, and that would then cause a lot of issues with the gut and with the whole body as a result. Then these ultra processed foods, refined sugars, can cause tight junction proteins like zonulins and occludins to malfunction. So for this lecture, it is important to watch my previous video where I talked about the zonulins and occludins, etc. Here, just very briefly, because this topic is going to come up again and again, in the epithelium of our gut, the lining cells of our gut, they need to make a tight barrier so that things from the gut lumen do not just randomly seep into the gut wall and into our body. So there are various proteins that bind these cells together, and they make tight junctions, and they kind of create a semi-sealed barrier. This barrier uses various proteins to do that function of sealing, and those proteins can become damaged by the food categories that we'll talk about today. And the result is that there would be a space that would appear between the cells, and from that space, harmful content can spill into our gut wall, and from there into the circulation, from there into our body, even going to brain. Then this category of food, the purified sugars and refined and ultra processed foods, they can increase intestinal permeability through glucose mediated cytokine release. I did this discussion that when the glucose is present in extra amounts, the immune cells, of course, they work with glucose, correct? They use energy, and part of that is glucose. And an example will be in diabetics, immune cells do not function very well at later stages if the diabetes is not controlled very well. And then they start developing infections that they cannot manage very well. Why? Because their immune cells have two problems. Number one, the immune cell is not getting enough sugar or glucose to work, to have the energy to work. And secondly, glucose is coating on its surface by doing glycation. So now we have an immune cell, let's say a macrophage, that has piles and piles of cement laden on it, which is the glycation, and it doesn't have enough energy to work anyways. So this immune system will not be functioning correctly. On the opposite side, if you feed too much sugar to the gut's immune cells, they will become overreactive. They would start producing inflammation, and that would also cause gut permeability issues. Then the second category is alcohol. So alcohol is interesting because this molecule can actually directly attack the epithelial cells, the gut lining cells, and damage them. This category of foods, if you will, the intake substance, can actually cause direct damage to the proteins that make the tight junctions. Then it causes increased endotoxic translocation. What does that mean? Imagine that this is a lumen of the gut, that is the hollow cavity in this tubular structure, the gut we have. And in the lumen, we have lots of gram-negative bacteria, and they're producing a lot of lipopolysaccharides. Lipopolysaccharides are poisonous things, toxic substances that are released by the bacteria. These LPS, lipopolysaccharides, can cross and seep into the gut wall through the permeability, so through the permeable junctions that have been produced because alcohol attacked these cells and the proteins here. The result will be the endotoxin, the poisons produced by the bacteria, will translocate behind the gut wall. From there, they would bother the immune system, which would then cause inflammation. They would get into the blood circulation and then go and bother the remaining parts of the body as well. Then alcohol triggers inflammatory response through acetaldehyde production. So alcohol gets broken down into acetaldehyde, and that acetaldehyde can actually trigger the immune system to become reactive. And of course, if that is immune system cell present within the gut, then there will be inflammation in the gut. Then alcohol alters the gut microbiota. And so let's say this was the good microbiota. Now we have the bad microbiota, or we have a change in the composition called dysbiosis. So the microbiota composition can become changed by alcohol. Then the next food category is the high omega-6 industrial seed oils. And I think this is something that we can work for a long time. I'm seeing someone who is spamming the comment system. So my request to you is that please be careful. So high omega-6 industrial seed oils. So what happens is, we have done this discussion before. I have actually done multiple videos discussing how our food types contain more omega-6 and less omega-3. And omega-6s in turn, so if I make a cell over here, let's say this is a cell membrane, the red one, this is a cell. When our cell is under stress, it will ask an enzyme which is called phospholipase A2. That enzyme is sent to the cell membrane, and that enzyme is asked to take, just one second. That enzyme is asked to go and bring omegas from the cell membrane. Now, if our cell membrane has omega-3s, the enzyme will go and pluck them and bring them out into the cytosol, and that will be used. If there are lots of omega-6s present in the cell membrane because of our food habits, the type of foods that we eat, then that would cause arachidonic acid production. Arachidonic acid, when it is produced inside a cell, it is then acted upon by the enzymes like cyclooxygenases, lipooxygenases, CYP450, which would then cause a bombardment of metabolite that are pro-inflammatory, potently pro-inflammatory. So if we have a lot of omega-6s in our body, then we'll have a lot of arachidonic acid every time the cell is under stress or wherever we have inflammation. On the other hand, if we have balanced omega-3 as well, then omega-3 is anti-inflammatory. So industrial seed oils are rich in omega-6s, and that can cause inflammatory state. When that inflammatory state occurs within the GIT, then we have epithelial barrier integrity issues. Another important thing with the omega-6s is that oxidative stress or lipid peroxidation occurs. This is actually a similar concept as I just discussed before. What happens is that when there are more omega-6s present, it is easier for them, that is true for omega-3 as well, it is easier for them to become oxidized because they have these double bonds, they have unsaturated bonds that can be attacked by high energy molecules. So again, I'm not doing a lot of mechanisms here, otherwise this lecture will be very long. But the short of this is that when omega-6s are present, we can end up with the lipid peroxidation or lipid species that are reactive, and then those species can then react with various parts of our cells and cause damage to the cell, mitochondria, cell membrane, etc. Omega-6s can damage cell membranes in the intestinal lining. And you can actually think about it. Omega-6s are present in the cell membrane when there is a stress on the cell, which intestinal lining cells are always under stress because we eat all kind of things, and then there is microbiota sitting there and converting them into various things. So under that stress, whenever the omega-6 is released, it would cause arachidonic acid production, which would then cause all the inflammatory cascade and cause problems. So intestinal cell themselves can become damaged. And then once the omega-3s are activated or arachidonic acid system pathway is activated, the nuclear factor kappa B pathway is activated as well. And just a quick note here, I have done on DrBeen, if you go to DrBeen.com, I have done a set of lectures about inflammatory pathways and what herbal or supplemental substances can help modulate them. In those pathways, I talked about arachidonic acid, nuclear factor kappa B, etc. So what happens is when inflammatory pathways are activated, they can actually in turn activate other pathways. So arachidonic acid pathway can activate nuclear factor kappa B pathway, which is also a very potent or just potent pro-inflammatory pathway. So the omega-6s can activate arachidonic acid and nuclear factor kappa B pathway, which would then cause epithelial cell damage. Not only that, but the tight junction protein damage causing permeability, which would then cause issues, as I discussed in the last video. So continuing on, the next is emulsifiers and artificial additives. For this one, I would highly recommend, if you can look at Banting Lecture 2011, Hyperinsulinemia, Cause or Consequence by Dr. Barbara E. Corky and her team members. What she said was that her team looked at more than 4,000 food agents. By food agents, what she meant was these substances are not part of the food. They're not ingredients of the food. Instead, they are additives. For example, they're food colors, they're preservatives, they're emulsifiers. There are other additives that are present in the food, 4,000. And what these additives do is that they cause an imbalance in redox operations of our body. In simple terms, our body produces a lot of reactive oxygen species and uses them for various actions. Reactive oxygen species are oxygens that are highly charged, they have high energy, and they can be used for various things, for example, killing pathogens. However, the same high energy oxygens or lipids can become harmful if we are not able to control them, or if we produce them in high quantities. So Dr. Barbara E. Corky's team, they proved that the food additives cause reactive oxygen species production, causing the cells to become irritated and inflamed. And she talked more about beta cells of the pancreas and how when the beta cells are irritated by these reactive oxygen species produced by the foods other than the glucose, like these additives and preservatives and food colors, they would cause the beta cell to start releasing insulin, and that insulin would then go to the cells, and the cells would say, well, there is insulin, but we don't have glucose. The cells would stop responding to that insulin, producing insulin resistance, causing diabetes to be produced. And she said in her hypothesis here, she said one reason can be all of these food components. So her lecture and her article is much more interesting than whatever I would discuss here. So I would recommend that you see that. And then here are some of the food additive products, some of them that can become damaging for epithelial barrier. For example, various emulsifiers, various preservatives, artificial colors, sweeteners, flavor enhancers. It is interesting, I forgot to mention this with the age products. Why do we eat age? Why does industry feed us age products all the time, advanced glycation and products? Because age feel tasty and their aroma is something we love. So of course the industry is going to give us whatever we feel tasty and whatever we love, right? So the flavor is the combination of the sense of smell and sense of taste. So the foods that contain lots of aged products in them, they have great aroma, they have a great flavor for us. That is why we eat them more. That is why industry feeds us more. So I do not know now it is our problem or their problem, but that is one of the issues. Same here, flavor enhancers, various products. Again, I have to give this disclaimer, which I gave in the beginning as well. There may be things that are really maybe my mistake that I added them and should not have been here. There are things that are missing here. There are things that may not be harmful to one, but harmful to another. I discussed that in the beginning of the lecture as well. So you have to kind of see what works for you versus not. These are kind of example lists and then example mechanisms. So common sources for these preservatives: processed meats, soft drinks, packaged baked goods, commercial salad dressings, ice creams, candies, processed cheese products, ready-to-eat meals. In general, industry-produced foods will have some sort of additives in them. so that the foods do not become bad very fast. The infection, the various fungi and bacteria do not start growing in them very fast. So they have a need to add these items in the food, but these can become harmful for us. So how do these preservatives damage us? Preservatives, colors, additives. One, if you look at Dr. Barbara E. Corky's lecture, as I said, reactive oxygen species or the redox operational imbalance occurs, which causes the irritation and inflammation throughout our body. Of course, that includes the gut. Gut is the first frontier which is going to face this kind of a food and become damaged before the rest of the body does. So one important thing that happens is that if you see here this cell lining, so this is a villus of the gut. This is a piece of gut which has this blue mucus in it, a thin layer of fluids. These are protective fluids. And when we have these emulsifiers, for example, they would go and emulsify this layer, and the amount of the thickness of the layer, the volume of the layer reduces, which then exposes these cells to harmful substances, and epithelial inflammation can occur, which would then cause intestinal permeability problems. Then these food agents, let's call them, as Dr. Barbara E. Corky calls them, the food agents also then change our microbiota as well. They can cause dysbiosis. They can cause microbiota damage, microbiome damage as well. And that would cause inflammation and epithelial problems. Then these food agents can trigger immune system. For example, our immune system might look at a preservative molecule and say, what the heck is this molecule? I do not like this. Our macrophage would then grab it and start reacting to it. And all of a sudden we have inflammation. Then gluten. Again, gluten in sensitive people. It's not necessary that everybody reacts negatively to gluten, but some people do. And so what happens is some people are not able to digest gluten correctly. And secondly, the gluten produces glutenin or gliadin-like molecules, which can harm our gut directly. So again, in some people, this action is more. So some products: wheat, bread, bagels, pastas. And of course, nowadays, there are so many food merchants who provide gluten-free products. So just having a name over here does not mean that that food has gluten. If that is gluten-free, then that is good. And so you can ask them that, is it gluten-free or not? So some more here. And now the question, how does gluten cause a problem? So as I said, in some individuals, they're not able to digest gluten correctly. And in other individuals, or the same individuals, when gluten breaks down in gliadin and glutenin, those gliadin molecules can irritate the intestinal epithelial cells. As a result of that, when the epithelium becomes inflamed, the epithelium, these cells, the gut lining cells, they will start producing a protein called zonulin. Zonulin is a reaction of the cells to say, oh man, I am under attack. I'm going to produce zonulins to help produce more of the tight junctions and to help protect myself. This zonulin that is increased is an indicator that the gut is under attack and it is inflamed. This zonulin can enter in the blood circulation and can be measured in the serum. This zonulin can enter the fecal matter as well, or the gut content as well, and be in the fecal matter. Normally, zonulin is measured in serum. It is actually a measurement for inflamed gut. So zonulin release is increased by gluten. Then, of course, gluten can cause immune system reaction. So that is what happens in some individuals, that gliadin and glutenin can cause macrophages and dendritic cells and the monocytes and the neutrophils and the natural killer cells to become activated, which will then cause immune system to become activated, which will cause inflammation of the gut wall, and then everything else follows. The harmful effect, or the leaky gut syndrome, can follow. Now, gluten can cause damage to the epithelium So our gut has villi in it. Villi are there for increasing the surface area of the gut so that more digestion and absorption can happen. So imagine that this is a piece of gut with the normal villi, these long structures on it. With the continuous attack on these from gluten and the shedding of these villi or the epithelial cells from here after these get damaged and not being able to make those cells correctly again, the villous surface of the intestine starts becoming more flat. And that is really bad because not only it reduces the surface area of the gut. So absorption becomes a problem, digestion becomes a problem, but also the cells that are present here are now fewer. And if you inflame them as well, then you have a fewer number of cells that are also sick. So the whole GIT's function becomes impacted. Then another group of foods, and this is the last one, FODMAP. So these are fermentable. So that this F here is the key word. Fermentable oligosaccharides, which are, the glucose is simple sugars, disaccharides, double, monosaccharides, and polyols. So these foods in some people, again, in sensitive people, can cause a lot of problem. They can become gassy, they can become bloated, the microbiota can become really harmful in them. The gut permeability not only changes because of the inflammation, but the pressure that is produced because of the gas that is produced, that would also stretch the cells away from each other and create permeability and create stretch on the gut and create stress on the cells. So this is also an important category, but in some individuals, for example, oligosaccharides, fructans, I'm just going to read a few, found in wheat, onions, garlics, legumes, beans, then disaccharides like in dairy products. And you may know that there are some people who are dairy intolerant. Monosaccharides like in honey, apple, high sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, polyol, sorbitol, mannitol, etc. So garlic and onion, wheat, dairy, apple, pear, mangoes, honey, legumes, mushrooms, cauliflower, sugar-free gums and candies, etc. These can cause an issue as well. So how do these foods cause a problem? What happens is that in majority of us, most of these simple sugars are broken down into smaller pieces or smaller units and then absorbed and used. However, in some individuals, these sugars are not properly broken down. And there can be many reasons for that. And that can take a separate series of lectures. But when they're not properly broken down, then our gut receives more and more of these less broken down products in the colon and rectal area where the microbiome is more abundantly present. And now that microbiome is going to feast on these molecules, and it would produce various gases, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, methane. So remember, just a side note, these gases are the 90% of the gases that we produce when we eat food, and they are odorless. So they do not have an odor. But about 10% of the gases have traces of sulfur attached to them. And these are the gases that are odorful or unpleasant. So now in these individuals, these FODMAP products, when they reach the gut microbiota acts on them, produces a lot of gas by fermenting these, and that gas in turn not only creates pressure effects, but also can become absorbed in the circulation and cause damage to the other tissues, depending upon what kind of gas and how much volume is produced. The liver is actively busy detoxifying some of these gases. And when these gases overwhelm the liver's capacity, then the body would start having reactions, and brain is a tissue that becomes affected by that as well. Then these gases, these food products can cause osmotic diarrhea. What does osmotic diarrhea mean? So imagine if this is gut, and we have big particles present inside the gut. Let's say these are sugars. What happens is if these are not broken down and absorbed and they are just present in the gut, they would keep water with them. The glucoses, for example, keep 8 molecules of water attached to them. They love water. Sodium loves water as well. So when the water is attached to the glucoses that are present, what will happen is that water would now get out of our body with glucose, and that would cause diarrhea because lots of water is now getting out of our body. This water was supposed to get absorbed, but because these food particles are staying in the gut, they are keeping water with them. So that means more softer stools. That means diarrhea would occur. So this is called osmotic diarrhea because this water is sitting here because of the osmotic pressure of the glucose. Then may increase the intestinal pressure. So as I said before, the gases and the waters that are filling the gut cavity, that would cause pressure effect, which would also cause intestinal cell pressure plus stretch, plus the stress on the cells, which would then cause inflammation, plus that would cause gut permeability as well, because the cells will be torn apart, if you will. That's not a medical term. Then these products, when they stress out the cells, then the local immune cells would respond and the inflammation would start. And that is the discussion for today. I hope it made sense. I can do another video. There was another recommendation to talk about those foods that are rich in histamine, and then how do we work with those histamine-rich foods and what can they do to us and how to protect ourselves from there. I feel that there is another natural follow-up lecture, and that is, so if these foods are harmful, what are the foods that are useful for an inflamed gut? So maybe these are the couple of lectures that I would do in the future, depending upon what is the interest in this one. If I have some views and likes on this one, then I'll do the follow-ups too. So with this, thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, and share. There are links in the description if you would like to support this work. And I would see you tomorrow. We have a lecture at 3 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock, and we would have a doctor who would discuss meat allergies with us. Thank you very much. And tomorrow is 25. So at 6 o'clock, we'll do a chit chat on the Cool Beans Cafe Live channel. I would share the link tomorrow on this channel, and you can then watch it if you like over there. With this, thank you very much and good night.